And welcome everybody who's here tonight, watching us, listening to us, being part of our group. Tonight, our conversation is going to be about Lag BOmer. Now, if you looked at your Jewish calendar, you might have wondered why exactly we are talking about Lag BOmer tonight. Because let's face it, Lag BOmer, if you consulted your Jewish calendar, if not, go to your local butcher shop or monument shop to pick one up so that so you can consult it next time. But you would see that Lag BOmer is not tonight. It is actually a week from tonight. It begins Monday night going into Tuesday. And at this point next week, Lag BOmer will be concluding. So you might have had the question as to why exactly Rabbi Landis chose to talk about Lag BOmer tonight. And the simple answer to that is because, first of all, if we waited till next week, Lag BOmer would pretty much already be over by the time we have Partners in Torah. So I wanted to be able to get you all the information about Lag BOmer beforehand so you can be properly prepared for Lag BOmer. And but in truth, beyond that, as many of you may or may not recall, Lag BOmer is the yahrzeit of Mr. Mendy Klein, who is the founder of Partners in Torah. He is the founder. He was our #1 supporter for our first 4 years or so. And Lag BOmer is his yahrzeit. He passed away Lag BOmer night, now 2 years ago. This will be his second yahrzeit. So next week, we are doing the second annual Partners in Torah Mendy Klein Memorial Lecture. The flyer is there in the chat box if you want to take a look at it later. But if you don't see it now, don't worry. It will be sent out at least once, or probably, as I usually do, I will cyber stalk you between now and then. But we will be doing the Mendy Klein Memorial Lecture next Tuesday night. So I figured with all these things considered, it made sense to go ahead and talk about Lag BOmer tonight. So, okay. Be it as it may, that's where we're diving in here. So tonight's discussion is Lag BOmer. Now, Lag BOmer is one of those fun holidays that, I'm sorry, someone just texted me for the link for tonight. And let me just give it to them. Give me 1 second here. I want to make sure everyone has their opportunity to participate. That's what happens when you're doing tech support and giving the class at the same time. You got to respond to the people. Give me 1 second here. Okay, sending that over to her. And Rachel will be joining us momentarily. Okay, so Lag BOmer is one of those fun Jewish holidays that I'll introduce the story from when I was in high school. So, as many of you know from my high school experience, I did not go to a Jewish school. I did not even go to normal public school. I actually went to a performing arts high school. So, if you ever saw the TV show Fame, Fame, I'm Gonna Live Forever, that was kind of what my high school was like. And if you don't believe me, my parents can vouch for it. They do in the chat box now because I have them muted, and even when I unmute everybody else, I'll probably keep them muted just to be safe. But that was my high school. I went to performing arts high school, and I was very involved in tech theater. And as I started becoming more religious, obviously that was a conflict I had to deal with, that our school productions were always on the weekend, and I had to start, I was starting to keep Shabbos, I was keeping the holidays, and it was more challenging to keep the school. So what I would do is I would always make like a document, like a memo at the beginning of the semester that said when all the Jewish holidays were for that coming semester, so that there were no surprises when I told the teacher that I wouldn't be here for this holiday or for that one. So I remember that it was the spring semester, or actually Georgia's a little funny. In Georgia, when I was growing up, we had quarters. Now, there are only 3 quarters. Now, you might think, okay, 1 second, quarters would imply 4, but this is the South. They can't count. So they only had 3 quarters. That's what they did. No, the truth is they counted the summer as a quarter for, again, Southerners always failed and had to go to summer school. But so it was the spring quarter, and I put my memo out to my teachers, and in it I said that I would be missing for the holiday of Shavuos. And one of my teachers said to me, Shavuos, that's not a real thing. That's one of those things that, like, you tell somebody that if you don't want to deal with it, you say, oh, I'll take care of it on Shavuos. And I really didn't know what he was talking about. I was like, no, it's a real holiday. It's in the Bible. It's in the Torah. I can show it to you. And but he said, hey, it's not a real holiday. Then I remember my wife and I were once watching some old TV show or old movie, and if you remember, all of the creators of Hollywood were first generation Jewish Americans, and so they're all the original movies were laced with all kinds of Jewish jokes. So I don't remember what movie it was, but there was some movie where they had this line that, they'll take care of it on Shavuos. So apparently that was a line in old movies, because for his first generation Eastern European immigrant children, they made fun of Shavuos because that was the holiday on the bottom of their list. It was one of those holidays that often fell after Hebrew school ended. So they made fun of that as the stepchild of Jewish holidays. If Shavuos is a holiday that many people treat that way, all the more so Lag BOmer would fall into that situation. Because while Shavuos is a major holiday mentioned in the Torah, Lag BOmer is one of the long list of minor holidays we have on the Jewish calendar. Now, in truth, there's a whole slew of minor holidays that we don't even commemorate nowadays. But Lag BOmer is one that has stood the test of time, that is still here. So let's first try to understand exactly what it is and how it is practiced, and maybe we'll come to a very special understanding on what this day means for the Jewish people. So first of all, just semantics on what it is. Lag BOmer, the name means Lamed Gimel, that's Lag BOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer. Because we're in the middle of probably, I believe, again, I'll have to think about it, but probably the second longest mitzvah in the Torah. Maybe there's more. Maybe there's longer ones than that. The third longest, we'll call it. The third longest mitzvah in the Torah. I think the longest mitzvah would probably be the Jubilee cycle, because that takes 50 years. The second would be the sabbatical cycle, because that takes 7 years. And then we have the counting of the Omer, which is 50 days or 49 days. And you have to actually count every night for 49 days to fulfill the mitzvah of the counting of the Omer. And this holiday of Lag BOmer is the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer, hence Lag BOmer, which begs a question. If there's 49 days of the Omer, with the 50th day being Shavuos, why in the world do we pick the 33rd day to make it a holiday? Now, I would understand maybe if you made the 25th day, the 26th day, somewhere in the middle, if you make that a holiday, why all of a sudden do we make just this random day in the middle of the counting of the Omer, the 33rd day, that becomes this minor holiday? So, in truth, on the surface, and even after we peel away layers maybe 1, 2, and 3, the holiday of Lag BOmer has, I don't want to say has nothing to do with, because we'll see it has a connection, but has very little to do with the counting of the Omer. It just, as we see the events that will unfold that we'll talk about, those events took place during the counting of the Omer, and the holiday therefore became put on Lag BOmer. So the counting of the Omer on its own is a mitzvah where we're counting from the exodus of Egypt, from Pesach, from the second night of Pesach, till Shavuos. Okay, we don't count the first night of Pesach, we don't count Shavuos. So if you take the first night of Pesach out, you take Shavuos out, you got 49 days in the middle, and that's what we're counting. And originally, until a certain point in history, circa 130, 135 of the Common Era, somewhere around there, this time period of the counting of the Omer was a very festive time. It's analogous to something like Chol HaMoed Pesach or Chol HaMoed Sukkos. It was looked at as a time period connecting two festivals, and therefore it was a very happy time period. So essentially, from the giving of the Torah in 1312 before the Common Era until roughly the year 130 of the Common Era, so for roughly 1,500 years, this time period was a very, very, very festive time for the Jewish people. Now, that changed at a certain point in history. What happened? So, after the destruction of the Second Temple, the Jews, as Jews were referred to in the Torah as the Am Kashei Oref, as the stiff-necked people. Now, that is both a blessing and a curse, right? That has been our shortcoming more times than one throughout Jewish history, but it's also part of the reason that we're still here, because we're a stiff-necked people. So sure enough, when the Romans destroyed the Second Temple in the year 70 of the Common Era, the Jews did not give up so easily. And whatever remnant there was of the Jews hung on however they could and kept trying to fight back. We have certain stories like the Masada story, which, by the way, I think we addressed this in a recent, I think in the last class, not a very Jewish story what happened there. But we see as the decades kind of played on, there were certain opportunities for the Jews to declare sovereignty again. And one of those opportunities came at the time period of a man by the name of Shimon Bar Yochai. Now we talked about him, I believe, 2 classes ago when we gave the class on the Messiah. That we talked about. Shimon Bar Yochai was a Mashiach candidate. He was recognized as recognized by the rabbis of his time as being a potential Messiah character. And many of the rabbis, including Rebbe Akiva, who was the greatest of the rabbis, thought that he was the Messiah. And it wasn't until it became clear that he wasn't the Messiah that they thought he was the Messiah, right? Eventually, he didn't achieve what the Messiah has to achieve to be the Messiah. You can see the class from 2 weeks ago on YouTube about the Messiah for more information on that. So that is the time period we are talking. Now, the leader of the Jewish people at the time was Rebbe Akiva. And the reason Lag BOmer is a holiday, to understand why Lag BOmer is a holiday, we have to understand it's because it is the culmination, the conclusion of a process of mourning, of a mourning process that lasted for 32 days. And it culminates with Lag BOmer, so we celebrate Lag BOmer. Okay, so first of all, the mourning process. You might have realized that I have this growth on my face, which I always say that this time period and the time period known as the 3 weeks between the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, these are the 2 periods of mourning on the Jewish calendar. And one of the practices of Jewish mourning is not to take a haircut. And hair means hair on top, which I only have so much to hold on to, but I have more than my dad. You can see his picture there, so I'm okay for now. But it also means hair on your face. So I always say this is one of the biannual reminders I have as to why I don't usually have a beard. Because if you see my beard comes in totally gray, it reminds me that I'm almost 42 years old, and I like to maintain that I'm really a little bit younger than that. But be it as it may, we are in this time period of mourning, and the Jewish practices of mourning are not taking a haircut, not listening to music, not having weddings or festive parties, not buying new items that make us happy, etc., etc. Those are the practices of Jewish mourning. Question is, why is it a period of mourning? And the answer is because it was during this time period, at that time in circa 130 of the Common Era, 135 of the Common Era, when the academy of Rebbe Akiva was hit with some sort of plague, and the whole entire academy was wiped out. Now, how big was this academy? It was 24,000 students. So again, you imagine that that's the size of a mid-sized university in America today. I mean, of course, we're not talking the Ohio State University, which is like 60,000 students, but it's maybe like the size of University of Kentucky or a mid-sized university. 24,000 students is a pretty big institution nowadays. So that was the size of Rebbe Akiva's academy at that time period. And during these 32 days, that happened to, or we'll see, nothing's a coincidence, but at least on the surface, looks like it happened to coincide with the counting of the Omer. This great academy of Torah, which is one of the largest academies ever of Torah, since that academy seemingly met its demise during these days, this time period became a time of mourning on the Jewish calendar. Now, you might say, why did such a great academy of Torah study meet such a horrible demise that literally within a month, the whole academy is wiped out? So the typical Jewish approach to tragedy is to never assume that tragedy happens for naught. If there's a tragedy that happens, it's there for us to learn from it. It's there for us to grow from it. It's there for us to take a lesson from it. I gave a talk last night on Torah Anytime that was entitled, "The Best Elul I've Ever Had in April," which is my response to the pandemic that's going on right now and some very personal experiences that I've had during these past several weeks of the pandemic. You can check that on Torah Anytime. This is product placement, by the way. So the if there's something tragic that happens, it happens for a reason. And our sages tell us, why was it that the Academy of Rebbe Akiva, that all the students perish during this time period of 32 days? Say our sages, it's because lo noagim kavod zeh lezeh, that they did not respect each other. They did not honor each other properly. They did not have the proper respect for their fellow student. And as a Torah scholar, that is one of the main raison d'etre of being a Torah scholar is to be a wonderful person. And we talk about the concept in Pirkei Avos of derech eretz kodem laTorah, that being a person of derech eretz, having normal manners and being kind and being compassionate and having all these things that are made up in derech eretz, that comes before Torah. And here you had these students that were missing the basic building block. They were great scholars. It was a great academy, but they didn't know how to honor each other properly. So our sages tell us that was the metaphysical reason the academy perished during this time period. Now, historians grapple with what actually happened. The Talmud actually says that there was actually a plague. There's a pandemic that hit Israel at that time called I'm having a senior moment now because of the beard. I'm blanking of what the Talmud calls it, but there was a plague that hit, a pandemic that hit Israel at that time, and now we can relate to pandemics very much nowadays, and that's what caused the students to perish. Historians say that it was quite possibly a result of the Bar Kokhba uprising and subsequent war with the Romans. That this great figure Bar Kokhba with messianic potential, that led to a third and final skirmish with the Romans, and the Romans put it down with brute force. We understand from the Talmud that probably up to 1 million Jews were killed at that time, that the blood of the Jews flowed into the Jordan River so much that the Jordan River was red with the blood of the Jewish people. That's what the Talmud tells us. It was a terrible massacre at the hand of the Romans. So according to many historians, the Academy of Rebbe Akiva was a result, if you will, was a casualty, was a negative result of the war with the Romans at that time. Be it as it may, the whole academy perishes, and the metaphysical reason our sages give us is because the scholars weren't honoring each other properly. Okay. So 32 days, the plague goes on, or the war goes on, or whatever it is, and the whole entire academy is wiped out. Lag BOmer rolls around, and the students stop dying. The plague comes to an end, the war comes to an end, whatever it is, the students stop dying. And because such a horrible, tragic time came to an end on this day of Lag BOmer was made into a holiday. So again, we want to put into very, very apropos modern day terms, that the curve was officially flattened on Lag BOmer, that there were no new reports of the pandemic, no new reports of the plague, no new deaths reported, and they realized that the plague had come to an end. And therefore, Lag BOmer was made a holiday. Now, we can ask a very, very honest question about this. And if you've listened to my classes before and you've heard me talk about Rebbe Akiva, you might have heard me ask this question. There were 24,000 students. All 24,000 students perished. You know why they stopped dying on Lag BOmer? It wasn't because the plague came to an end. It wasn't because the pandemic ended. It's because they were already dead. Right? There was no one left to die. Right? 24,000 students died. 24,000 students perished during the time. After the last student passes away, the plague is over because there's no one left to die. For that, we make it a holiday? I mean, imagine, let's take it something a little bit less gruesome as death. A person's going through great financial struggles, and every week they're losing $1,000. They start off with $24,000, and every week they're losing $1,000, 24, 23, 22, 21, and all of a sudden they get down to zero and say, oh, good, the plague is over, right? The curse is over. I'm not going to lose any more money. Yeah, you know why you're not going to lose any more money? Because you lost it all already. And for that, you make a holiday? For that, we're going to make it Lag BOmer in a week? The answer is, it's not what happened on Lag BOmer. It was Rebbe Akiva's response to what happened on Lag BOmer. Now, imagine for a moment you were Rebbe Akiva. Now, again, if you've heard my classes before, I talk about Rebbe Akiva. I believe I just addressed him in a class before Pesach, so you can either tune out now, or you can just listen to the repetition, because as we know that there's the great rabbinical rule of repetition, which is based on how often it takes people to forget what a rabbi says. So we're taught in yeshiva that a rabbi can repeat a good joke once a year, a good story once a month, and a nice Torah idea twice in the same class. So, based on that rule, I have no problem talking about Rebbe Akiva, even though I just mentioned him about a month ago in a class before Pesach. Imagine you're Rebbe Akiva for a minute. Who is Rebbe Akiva? Akiva Ben Yoseph is who he was before he was Rebbe Akiva, was a descendant of converts. Either his father or his grandfather was a convert to Judaism, which, by the way, conversion to Judaism was very, very common at that point in the Roman Empire. Now, if we realize, again, we're talking 1st century, 2nd century of the Common Era, what else is going on in the world besides the Jews being persecuted by the Romans? Well, we have the rise of Christianity also going on in the world. That didn't come in a vacuum. The Roman Empire was spiritually bankrupt. They already saw through paganism. They weren't interested in polytheism anymore. They were looking for something. And according to many historians, up to 10% of the Roman Empire at that point in history converted to Judaism. Now, when Christianity came along and offered them a monotheistic religion without circumcision, without keeping Shabbos, without keeping kosher, they flocked to that in droves. But the atmosphere that Christianity comes into is one where the Roman Empire as a whole was already bankrupt on paganism and polytheism and was looking for something else. So we understand that quite possibly up to a tenth of the Roman Empire converted to Judaism at this time. And Akiva Ben Yoseph was a descendant of one of those converts, either 1st generation or 2nd generation. And for the first 40 years of his life, he is a complete ignoramus. He did not know a word of Torah. He didn't even know Aleph Beis. He didn't know the Hebrew alphabet. And he was a shepherd. That's what he did by profession. And when he was a marriageable age, he actually got a great shidduch. He married a wonderful woman named Rachel, the daughter of Kalba Savua. Now, Kalba Savua at that time was a known gevir, a known wealthy man, a very wealthy man at that time. And when his daughter Rachel decides to marry this Akiva Ben Yoseph, who was not rich, who was an ignoramus, he was a shepherd. It was, as we would say in Yiddish, pas nicht that a girl like Rachel should marry a guy like Akiva. And Kalba Savua said, you're marrying Akiva. You want to marry this Akiva? Fine, marry this Akiva, but you're not my daughter anymore. You won't have any of my wealth. You won't have anything from me. She said, I see something special in this man. I'm going to marry him. So she marries him, I don't know, when he was in his 20s, a good 15 years before anything develops, anything comes of him. One day, Akiva is out in the pasture shepherding his sheep or doing whatever you do when you're a shepherd, and he notices a rock with a hole that is ground into the rock caused by a stream of water that had been dripping on that rock for generations. And Akiva starts to think about this. And he realizes, as a book that I had when I was a kid said, and the great confrontation between the rock and the stream will always win. Not by strength, but through perseverance. And Akiva Ben Yoseph realized that. And he said, 1 second. If water, which is compared to Torah, is soft, and it can penetrate this rock, which is hard, then my heart, which is hard and knows nothing because I'm an ignoramus, can surely be penetrated by Torah. I'm going to try my hand at learning Torah. And he goes to tell his wife Rachel, who, they're already, let's say, as a shepherd, maybe they're middle class, maybe mid to lower class, I don't exactly know. But he tells Rachel, he says, Rachel, sweetie, I want to go learn Torah. I know I'm 40 years old. I know you rely on my income from shepherding, but I want to go learn Torah. To which Rachel says, Akiva, this is what I've been waiting for, and this is why I married you. Go, learn, take as long as you need. I'll manage back here with the kids. I'll make it all work. Fine. So Akiva goes off, and he goes off to the great academy of Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Eliezer, and he starts studying. But as we mentioned before, he was 40 years old. That means he was a year and almost 2 years younger than I am today. And he didn't know Aleph Beis. So imagine the situation. You go to learn Torah and you don't know Aleph Beis. You can't read. You can't do anything. You don't know anything. You have to start somewhere. So they don't send him straight up to the rabbinical academy, to the yeshiva. They say, okay, you got to go to the cheder with the kindergartners. So you can imagine the scene that went on at that time. Okay, Dovi, it's your turn to read. Kametz Alapha, Kametz Beis Ba, Kametz Gimel Gab. Beautiful. Okay, Shimmy, it's your turn to read. Kametz Alapha, Kametz Beis Ba, Kametz Gimel Gab. Beautiful. Okay, Akiva, it's your turn to read. Kametz Alapha, Kametz Beis Ba, Kametz Gimel Gab. But that's what he did. He was willing to submit, to put away any drop of honor or self-worth that he had, to sit in a class with children much younger than him and start literally from Aleph Beis, to start from the beginning. And that's the approach he took. And one day at a time, one step at a time, he let the water of Torah penetrate his heart, and he built himself up to where in 12 years, at the age of 52, he not only became a Torah scholar, but he had inherited the academy of Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer, and he had built that academy to a strength of 12,000 students, to half of the greatness that it would eventually achieve. Rebbe Akiva says, okay, I've reached my goal. I'm a Talmud Chacham. I'm a Torah scholar. I built a great academy. Now it's time to go back and reunite with my family. So he starts heading back to Israel, heading back to the family, probably in around Tiberia is where they lived. And maybe Beit Shan, somewhere around there. Maybe Tzipori, somewhere in that area in the north, in the Galilee. And he makes his way back, of course, with all his students. And they're getting closer to his town. And he starts to approach a way towards his house. And like you can imagine the scene here for a minute. Like the way our sages tell it to us is Akiva came up on the house and Rachel didn't know that he was outside. Now he's coming with 12,000 students, for crying out loud. Like what's he do? He says, shh, shh, I want to surprise my wife. Be quiet. Right? So whatever it is, he sneaks up on the house and he overhears his wife Rachel inside talking to one of the neighbors. And this lady is saying, your husband is such a louse. He leaves you like this for 12 years, gives you no financial support, leaves you to not only take care of the kids, but support the family, and you're living in rags, you're living in such a terrible situation. Your husband's a terrible person. She says, my husband is amazing. Not only did he leave because he wanted to, he left because I wanted him to, because that's why I married him. And not only that, but if he was standing here today, I would say, Akiva, go back for another 12 years. Akiva standing outside says, well, I am standing here today. All right, boys, let's head on back. And Akiva goes back for another 12 years. Now, again, at this point, we could ask a lot of questions like, why not go in and say hello, give her a kiss, have a cup of coffee, say hello to the kids? There's a fundamental lesson here that we're not going to dive into too deep, but 12 plus 12 does not equal 24 necessarily. Quite often when we're in the zone of growth, when we're in the zone of doing something, anyone in their vocation or their vocation or whatever it is, or something they're passionate about, you know that when you're focused on something, you're in the zone and you get taken out of that for a moment, how that it takes a long time to get back into that zone. And this is talked about by all the books on leadership and development and being successful in time management, that once you're taken out of the zone to get back in that zone, it's not going to be the same. So if you're working on something, say, for 30 minutes, but you're interrupted halfway through with an email, with a phone call, with whatever it is, that's not going to be a total of 30 minutes. That was a 15-minute segment with the warm-up and you hit your stride, and then another 15 minutes where you warm up and you hit your stride. So that's what I understand what Rebbe Akiva did, that he didn't want to break the stride. He goes back to yeshiva another 12 years. And he, again, in those 12 years, doubles the size of the academy, makes the academy a 24,000 student academy. After the 24 years, 64 years old, comes back to reunite with his wife. The word goes out that the great scholar, Rebbe Akiva, is coming to visit the town with his 24,000 students. And, they come into the town and they're all singing, Yami, Mayame, Melech, Taisif, right? Singing the song that we sing when a great rabbi comes in. And his wife goes out to greet him. And the students see this old lady in rags, probably also about 60-something years old. Again, not so old, but again, decrepit, rags, everything. And she's trying to go up to see the great rabbi, Rebbe Akiva. And the students aren't going to let this lady just push her way up to the front to see the rabbi. Akiva from a distance sees what's going on. He says, no, let her come up, and you need to treat her with more honor than you treat me with. Because everything that I am, and everything that you are is only because of her. And And not only that, but Kalba Savur realizes the ills of his ways, and he actually had taken a vow not to give any wealth to his children. So he annuls the vow, and Akiva ends up with the full wealth of Kalba Savua, and he's able to give his wife everything she deserves for the rest of her life. What happens next? That's when the war with Bar Kokhba happens. And shortly after this incident is when we understand the plague or the war, whatever it is, hits the camp, and the whole entire student body of the yeshiva is wiped out in 32 days. Comes Lag BOmer. Now, you can imagine what those 32 days were like for Rebbe Akiva. I mean, do your math. My dad's on now. He's a great mathematician. You take 24,000 divided by 32. I don't know. That's about 750, 800 a day or something like that. Is a little short of 1,000 students dying a day. So for every day for those 32 days, he's literally running back and forth, trying to nurse his students back to health, doing funerals for the ones who passed away, consoling the families of those who were sitting Shiva. And this is what his life has been like for 32 days. Finally, it comes to an end. You make a party? You make a party out of 32 days like that? You make a holiday because of, that's over? No. But we can ask a question on Rebbe Akiva at this point. Would anyone have faulted Rebbe Akiva if he had at that point said, you know what? I gave this a fair try. I built a huge academy. I did something great. It didn't take. It didn't take. You know what? I'm done. I'm retiring. I'm hanging up my frock. We talk about rabbis wear the frocks, the long coats, the kaftans. I'm hanging up the frock. I'm hanging up the Rosh Hashiva's hat, and I'm going to retire with my wife. We got our wealth now, and I tried the Talmud Chacham thing, tried the scholar thing, tried having the academy. Didn't work. I'm done. I'm retired. Would anyone have faulted Rebbe Akiva if he had done that? No. In fact, dare I say, most of us would have for sure done that if you have something so tragic happen, that you built such an amazing thing and you see it all crumble before your eyes. Lag BOmer is a holiday not because they stopped dying, but because of what Rebbe Akiva did next. What did he do? He rebuilt that academy. He rebuilt that academy this time, not with 24,000 students, but with 5 students. And those 5 students are Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Yosef ben Chalifta, Rabbi Yehuda ben Eloi. I added in one too many there. Rabbi Elazar was the son of Shimon Bar Yochai. Sorry about that. And Rabbi Elazar ben Shmua and Rabbi Meir. 5 students. And he says, okay, last time I went for quantity. This time I'm going for quality. And he gave over everything in the remaining years of his life to those 5 students. Now, this was not a very easy time to have any kind of rabbinic academy. Why? Because after the Bar Kokhba revolt, we understand that was the 3rd war between the Jews and the Romans in less than 100 years. At this point, the Romans have kind of had it with the Jews, and they want to make sure there'll be no connection whatsoever with the Jews and Judaism and Israel anymore. They say, we are putting down the Jews with a vengeance at this point. There's an evil emperor by the name of Hadrian, and he made what we understand to be called the Hadrianic decrees. And they went into full force. Now, if you may recall that on Yom Kippur, there's a poem that we say in the Musaf service called the Asari Harugi Malchus, where we memorialize the 10 martyrs, the 10 rabbis who were killed by the government. That was at this time period. And we read a similar poem called Arze Lavonon on Tisha B'Av. It was a terrible time to be a Jew because the Romans came in, led by Hadrian, and put down Judaism with a force. Anti-Semitic laws worse than anything we've seen, probably just as bad, if not worse, than Hitler, Yamach Shemo. So it was illegal to teach Torah on pain of death. Now, some of the other things they did at the time period, they said Jews can't be in Jerusalem anymore because Bar Kokhba had reconquered Jerusalem. According to many commentators and many historians, he had started to bring sacrifices once again on the temple, and the Romans said, "Forget it. Jews are out of Jerusalem forever." Jerusalem was one of the first Judenrein cities in the world. They changed the name from Jerusalem to Alea Capitolina to the capital city. They changed the name of the land from Judah, which it was called at that point, to Philistia. If you ever wonder where the term Palestine came from, that's where it came from. It was the term put on by the Romans to try and erase and do away with the Jewish history and the Jewish heritage of the land. Again, Sounds familiar and goes very well with the name even nowadays. But that's where the term Palestine came from. And they made it illegal to teach Torah on pain of death. Rebbe Akiva said, one second, if I don't teach Torah, I can't live. If you take a fish out of the water, it can't live. Now, yeah, I might get put to death if you take me out of water anyways, but I at least have to try. I at least have to try to teach. And he worked on teaching those 5 students everything. And even though the Romans tried to totally destroy Torah, totally destroy Judaism at that time, because Rebbe Akiva was Moser Nefesh, because he gave up everything to teach everything that he had to those 5 students, because of that, we're still here today. And because of that, Judaism was rebuilt after Hadrian and after the Romans, and Judaism lived on. What happens to Rebbe Akiva? He's arrested. He's sentenced to death. He's taken out and he's executed in the Hippodrome in Caesarea. If you've ever been to Israel, to that beautiful area of Caesarea, you know, with the great eye for history that they sometimes have in the modern day state of Israel, they now use the Colosseum at Caesarea for concerts in Israel. Apparently, if you're a musician trying to make it in Israeli pop music, you need to have a concert in Caesarea. But just next to that Colosseum is the Hippodrome, and that's where Rebbe Akiva was assassinated, was murdered by the Romans. And he's taken out into the Hippodrome at the break of dawn one day to be brutally murdered. And the way that the Romans decided to kill these great rabbis, they didn't say, they weren't just going to hang them or do it, electric chair, lethal injection. They said, no, we're going to make sure to cherish the moment and make sure that these rabbis feel as much pain as they can possibly feel. And the way that they martyred Rebbe Akiva was they took combs and they raked the skin off of his body. Okay, well, this is the parental warning part of the class, a vivid picture if you think about it. But that's how Rebbe Akiva was murdered. So Rebbe Akiva is in the process of being tortured by the Romans, and daybreak comes, and he starts to say the Shema. His students who are looking on with tears at this scene, they say, Rebbe, like, Ad Khan, like, we understand you're a great tzaddik, a great righteous Jew, a great scholar, but so much so that when you're being martyred for teaching Torah, you can still say the Shema, which is the anthem of the Jewish people, which is the statement of faith of the Jewish people. To which Rebbe Akiva responds, all my life, since becoming a scholar at the age of 40, or starting to become a scholar, I struggled with the verse, V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, you should love Hashem your God, v'chol levavcha, v'chol nafshecha, v'chol ma'odecha, which means you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your possessions. I knew that I was doing it with all my heart, and I knew that I had done it with all my possessions. But would I really do it if push came to shove and I had to give up my life for God? Would I do that? Would I really show that I love God with my entire fiber of my being, with my whole life? Now that I have the opportunity to show that that's how much I love the Almighty, I'm not going to take the opportunity. I'm going to miss the opportunity. And the way the Talmud and Brachos tells us the story is that as they came up to his head, Akiva was saying, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu. And as they got to the place where the tefillin was on his head, says the words, Hashem Echad. And with the word Echad, the final word of Shema, his soul leaves his body. And that, my friends, is why Lag BOmer is a holiday. Not necessarily because the students stopped dying. It's that after all that, we had this eternal lesson of Rebbe Akiva, that when a Jew gets knocked down, a Jew always gets up and keeps fighting. We are the ultimate phoenix, the rise of the phoenix. That is the Jewish people. And by the way, that's where the custom comes from that many of you might be familiar with, to make bonfires on Lag BOmer. Right? And now in America, this isn't such a big thing, because in order to make a bonfire, you have to get a permit from the local fire department, and nobody under the age of 21 is even allowed to look at the fire unless they get retina damage. The kids just stand about 300 feet away and wave their hot dogs and marshmallows. But, you go to Israel, if you're ever in Israel for Lag BOmer, you understand this is a really big deal. This is a holiday they take very seriously. And we're already a week out from Lag BOmer, and I'm sure, well, now because of Corona, well, maybe this is why Netanyahu lifted the Corona restrictions, because he knows Lag BOmer is coming. So usually on a normal year before Lag BOmer, kids are already running around collecting their wood to be able to make their pyre, to make their big bonfire that they're going to make. And you see in the Jewish neighborhoods, and especially the religious neighborhoods, the piles of wood getting taller and taller and taller as they get closer to Lag BOmer. And the kids take the wood from wherever they can get it. They go out and they take branches from trees. They go to construction sites. They take trees themselves. They take apart construction sites, and those piles of wood get bigger and bigger. And it's, the night of Lag BOmer comes around. And you just have these kids running through the street, lighting these fires, and the parents, like somewhere hiding under their beds in their apartments, just wait until it's all done. It's like the night of the burning child. Someone once told me that on Lag BOmer, they were flying out of Israel. They could look down from the sky and see a cloud of smoke over the whole entire country. But that's at least one of the customs on Lag BOmer, that we make a bonfire. Where's that custom come of a bonfire? So it comes from two places. Number one, it's the lesson of Rebbe Akiva. What is a fire? A fire is you take a piece of wood or a piece of fuel, a piece of oil, whatever your fuel is for the fire, whether it's wood or wax or oil or whatever it is. And what do you do to that piece of fuel? You burn it. You set it ablaze. You do something that looks like you are destroying it. Right? If we didn't know how science worked, and you saw me take a log of wood and throw it into a fire, you would think I was destroying it. But if I explained to you how it works, I would say, no, through the destruction of that log, that's how we get this beautiful fire. That's how we get the heat. And that's the idea of Rebbe Akiva. Rebbe Akiva went through such destruction in his life, but through the destruction, he emerged to light the fire of Torah. One of the students that he inspired, one of those 5 students, was Shimon Bar Yochai. And it happened to be that a number of years later, that Shimon Bar Yochai actually passed away on Lag BOmer. So another thing that's commemorated on Lag BOmer is the yard site of Shimon Bar Yochai. Shimon Bar Yochai, we understand, is the author of the Zohar, which is the main work of Kabbalah, of Jewish metaphysics. And a lot of times the idea of metaphysics, of Jewish spiritual learning, is compared also to the fire of Torah, to the Esha Torah. And that is something that we also celebrate on this day. And that's where the famous custom comes from, to go to Meron. Meron is traditionally where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was buried. And many thousands of Jews go to Meron, to his gravesite on Lag BOmer, to celebrate with Shimon Bar Yochai, to commemorate his life and also the life of his Rebbe, the life of Rebbe Akiva. And that's the lesson of Lag BOmer, that we take something that looks like all's lost. It looks like it's burnt away and it's ash and there's nothing left. That's when the fire comes out. And that is the secret of Jewish survival. That throughout every generation, I mentioned before, we're the Am Kashay Oraf, that it many times got us into trouble, but it also got us through a lot. Because when they try and burn us, we get up and we fight on. And that's the lesson we take from Rebbe Akiva. And because Rebbe Akiva fought on Lag BOmer, when all else seemed lost, that's why we are still here today. Another one of the great students of Rebbe Akiva we mentioned was Rebbe Meir. Rebbe Meir was one of those 5 students. Rebbe Meir is significant because he laid down the whole corpus, the whole skeleton, if you will, the backbone of what eventually became the Mishnah. It ends up being his student, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who actually is the one who redacts the Mishnah, but he does it heavily based on the notebooks, based on the writings and the works of Rebbe Meir. And it's because Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Judah the Prince, at that time wrote down the Mishnah, that we're still here today learning Torah, that we have something to study, that we can relate back to the Torah of Rebbe Akiva. So that's the lesson of Rebbe Akiva. So we don't celebrate Lag BOmer because that's when the students stop dying. We celebrate Lag BOmer that when they stopped dying, Rebbe Akiva got up and fought on. And just like a fire, if we didn't understand what it was, it would look like it's total destruction. We understand that through that destruction comes out the fuel, comes out the fire, because that is the story of the survival of the Jewish people. And that's really the whole holiday. I mean, it's a lot here. There's a lot here to think about. Now, the observance of the holiday is, again, you got to build a bonfire. That's been a custom since time immemorial. We don't say tachana. We don't say mournful prayers. But that's really why we observe it as a holiday. Now, one other layer that I'll throw in before I open it up for questions as to why this time period is considered a time period of mourning is because in antiquity, and when I say antiquity, I'm not talking about ancient antiquity. I mean, I am talking about ancient antiquity, but even more recent antiquity, like up to World War II and probably even more recent, we understand that while spring and summer represent a time period of, it's nice outside, we can go out of our homes, we can rejuvenate, we can enjoy the outside, summer camp, all the wonderful things we associate the spring and the summer with. Again, not when pandemics are going on, but on a quote unquote normal year. But we see in antiquity, the spring and the summer wasn't such a good time for the Jewish people. So when we talk about World War II, for example, and the, Baruch Hashem, what eventually became the destruction of Hitler, we're coming up on the time period when World War II ended, when the armistice was signed and the war ended. But when we talk about who defeated Hitler, if I would throw out the question of who defeated Hitler, Yamach Shemo, you might say, oh, it was the it was the Americans, oh, it was the British, no, it's not true. If you study history, it wasn't the Allies, it wasn't the British, it wasn't the British, Americans, or the Russians. It was none of the Allies. It was the Russian winter, right? That's what defeated Hitler, because Hitler overextended himself going into Russia and didn't have the supply lines to support his people. It got too cold, they couldn't fight, and that was the end of the German army. He was fighting a two-front war, and it was really the Russian winter that defeated the Germans, Baruch Hashem. But in antiquity, it was the same thing, that armies realized they couldn't go out and fight in the winter because they knew it was too cold. They couldn't get it done. So when the spring and summer came along, that's when the wars would happen. So when we talk about great tragedies in Jewish history, like the Crusades, for example, Crusades always happen in the spring and summer. And it was during this period of the counting of the Omer that we saw that many great Jewish communities were wiped out at the hands of the Crusaders. So beyond mourning the loss of Rebbe Akiva's academy and roughly the year 130, 135 of the Common Era, we're also mourning the loss of many great communities at the time of the First Crusade in 1095, because again, this is when wars would happen. This is when it made sense to go out and fight wars. Now, the last thing I just want to address is I mentioned before how, and up until this point in the class, you would agree with the statement that the whole concept of the Omer being associated as a time of mourning and how we call it Lag BOmer, and it all seems to be really just a coincidence. The Omer was something else, counting from Pesach to Shavuos, the rise to Sinai, if you will, the rise of the Jews through the 49 levels until they could receive the Torah. And then on top of that, we had these other tragedies happen. So it became instead of a happy time, a mourning time. But really, we have that happiness because we need to talk about it, we need to count and all that, are seemingly unrelated on the surface. But as we all know, as Jews, nothing is unrelated. The great tragedy of Rebbe Akiva happened because the scholars didn't get it. They didn't get the full lesson, if you will. So in a time period, it's usually a time period of tremendous Torah growth, tremendous growth in connection to Torah. It would make sense that that's when this would be exposed, where they were lacking in Torah. In other words, in a time period where us Jews are supposed to look and say, this is a time period when we grow as Jews. This is a time period we come closer to each other, we come closer in Torah. It was at that time in history when this shortcoming that they had of not honoring each other properly was exacerbated. So all the more so, it was under the magnifying glass that it came out. And so too with the Crusades. We understand in many ways that the Crusades were a challenge to the Jewish people because of lack of connection to Torah learning. And this is the time period we're supposed to be connecting with Torah learning. So here we are, last night we counted, I believe, the 25th day of the Omer, and we still have half the time left to count the Omer, and this is a time we're supposed to make the commitments for Torah learning. So Baruch Hashem, thank God all you people here are here studying Torah on a Tuesday night, even with the Federation closed, you're still here on Zoom, but this is the time period where we really make the commitment to Torah learning. We say, this is when we're going to grow in Torah learning, because that's what this time period is all about, and that's what Jews are supposed to be doing during this time period. Okay, let's open it up now for questions. I'm just going to unmute everybody. One moment here. Let me just realize how I muted you to begin with. How did I mute you? Over here somewhere. I think I muted you. 1 second. Participants, right? By the time this the pandemic comes to an end, I'll have the whole Zoom thing figured out. But if you have a question, feel free to throw it into the chat box, or feel free to blurt it out right now. If you know how to raise your hands on Zoom, you can raise your hands, and I can we'll call on you that way. But this is the audience participation time of our class. So any questions, comments, concerns? Good job. Okay, my mom's got a question. Mom, go for it.
The schools in Georgia do know how to count. We have 4 quarters because we do summer quarter.
So you're saying that the rest of the world, where they call it trimesters or semesters, and they don't count the summer. Well, I guess that's what they do. They have the 2 semesters, and they call it whatever.
But right now, it doesn't even matter because the schools are barely open.
Well, Georgia's got it all figured out when it comes to the schools, but not necessarily all figured out when it comes to reopening the state. That's a different story for a different time. So we can knock on Georgians right now. So Okay, any other questions, comments, concerns? Mikhail, you always got something to say on these things. Mikhail, what do you have to say for yourself?
So what's the minimum number of students that we have to do in every yeshiva that we start?
At least 5, right? It's actually an interesting question. That Mikhail's asking a great question. Like, okay, it's a time period when we want to go out and start great academies for Torah learning. What's the minimum to start at? So I'll tell you a great, first of all, we say from Rebbe Akiva is 5. I'll tell you my tradition from one of my teachers was that one of my teachers, Rishagi Newberger, would always teach as long as there were 2 students there. As long as there were at least 2 students there, he would teach class. And he called him Mezuman, right? Because a Mezuman, the idea is when you say the Birkat HaMazon, you have to have at least 3 people there. He said, as long as me and 2 other students here, I'm going to teach. And he said, in truth, it was a tradition he had from Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, because there was a great story told with Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky that Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. I'm muting everyone just until we get to the next question because my mom's talking. I can mute her on Zoom, but I can't mute her in real life, so just muting her here. So Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, one day it was a great snowstorm in Brooklyn when he taught, and only 2 students showed up to class that day. And those 2 students said that he taught the class with the same fervor and energy that he taught the class with every single day when it was full of 20 or 30 students. And at some point, when the students raised his hand and said, Rebbe, you can tone it down a little bit. It's just the 2 of us here right now. And he said, you think I'm only teaching the 2 of you? I'm not just teaching you. I'm teaching you, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, your students, their students. I'm teaching generations here. So based on this, Mikhail, would seem the minimum is 2. But I'll tell you an even better story. I believe the story was with Rav Yaakov Galitsky. Thank you, Heather. I love that too. It's a great story. So I believe it was with Rebbe Akiva. Rebbe Akiva was a student from the Great Kamenetz network of yeshivas. So there's a small yeshiva in Israel today I believe it's on Rehov Yecheskel or I think that's where it is in Jerusalem, right near Kikar Shabbos. But the Kamenetz yeshiva before the war was a network of 30 or 40 different yeshivas in many towns. And even at the beginning of the state of Israel after the war, the descendants of the Kamenetz yeshiva were opening yeshivas all over the place. And Rav Yaakov Galitsky went to a certain town, and I forget what town it was. And he said, I'm starting a yeshiva here. And someone asked him, how many, you're starting a yeshiva, how big is your student body? He said, oh, it's just 1. And he said, oh, really? How big is your teaching staff? He said, oh, it's just 1. He said, really? How big is your staff altogether? He said, oh, it's just 1. He's like, what are you talking about? He said, no, it's all just me. Right now, it's just me. But I'm starting a yeshiva. So eventually we'll build it up to something. So I think, Mikhail, at one level, the answer to your story is any place where a Jew teaches Torah is a yeshiva, is a great academy. And in this time period where, this is the business I'm in, teaching Torah, but it's a time period of great growth, and we need to all do our part to not only teach Torah and learn Torah, but to help to build Torah and support Torah, because it is the time period for that. So, okay, any other questions, comments, concerns, thoughts?
What are the chances you'll set up a fire somewhere and things will frost 6 days from now?
So it's interesting. In my class from last night, again, you can find on Torah anytime, called The Best Elul I've Ever Had in April, I said that, I'm optimistic that by Shavuos is, we have 3.5 weeks till Shavuos. I'm optimistic that by Shavuos, in some way, shape, or form, the shuls and the kolos and everything will reopen, and there'll be some sort of Shavuos program, of course, with social distancing and with all the proper precautions and probably wearing masks and whatnot. But, so I'm optimistic for Shavuos. I don't know if I'm so optimistic for Lag BOmer. My kids said to me, my kids asked me if we could build a bonfire in our backyard on Shavuos, because they said, we have such a great backyard for building a fire. I said, what in the world are you talking about? We have the worst possible backyard for building a fire. If you've ever been in my backyard, it's like, it wasn't graded right when they, many of you have heard the sagas of when we moved into our house and it wasn't graded right. And it's always muddy and wet. And it's like, worst place in the world to build a bonfire. I said, we'll have a barbecue. We'll light up the Weber grill that my parents gave us, I think, for our first anniversary. We're about to have Kanana Har, our 19th anniversary. And we still have the same Weber grill they gave us. It wasn't our first anniversary?
No, Yahweh was running around already, remember?
Okay, so maybe our second anniversary, or whatever it was, third
He was the one
anniversary.
that found it.
We're still in Baltimore. We're still in Baltimore, whatever it was. But you know, we re-outfitted the Weber grill many a times. Had to change the grates and those, they call them the flavorizers. And you know, that's a great thing about the Weber grill. It's very easy to re-outfit with we put in new gas line, new grates, new flavorizers. By the way, tonight's class has been brought to you by Weber. You can get a new Weber grill at your local Home Depot or on Amazon.com. You know, I said we have a barbecue with our Weber grill, and we'd roast some hot dogs, hamburgers, and marshmallows. And I think that's the closest we're going to do to building a bonfire. That being said, please keep in mind, at least next Tuesday night, again, it'll be as Lag BOmer is exiting, we will have the second annual Mendy Klein Memorial Lecture. I put the flyer there, and I put the flyer there in the you know, in the Zoom chat there. The title of the lecture will be "Finding Godliness Everywhere" or something like that. I don't know. We have to open up the flyer now to see what I actually put to. What did I call it here? Whatever is defining. Here, I'm opening up right now because I forgot. Finding the divine in everything. Right. So it'll be the second annual Partners in Torah of Cleveland Mendy Klein Memorial Lecture, Finding the Divine in Everything. And for those of you who don't know who Mendy was, he was just a wonderful, you know, larger than life, did more to build this community than many other, and just in so many others. He's one of the pillars. I remember hearing from Dan Zellman, one of the Federation leaders, that before Mendy passed away, that Cleveland had the 5 M's. That's who was holding Cleveland. You had the Mandels, you had the Maltzes, you had Mendy, I forget who the rest were, but there were a few. You had Miller, which is Ratner, and you know, it was the 4 or 5. I forget what the number was, but Joanne, you can tell me from Federation what they say about this. But is it 4 or 5? I don't remember. Whatever it was, Mendy was considered one of the
4 sounds right.
Yeah, for me it was the 4. It was the Mandels, it was the Maltz, the Miller, Ratners, and Mendy. Right, so the 4 M's who held up Cleveland for so long, and he founded Partners in Torah. So we're all really here tonight, and all the wonderful things we do. It's all because of him. So next week, God willing, we'll pay tribute to him with some words of inspiration and a little bit of words of eulogy too, to remember his greatness. And I hope you'll join us for that. If you happen to miss it here on Zoom, it'll be here on Zoom. But if you happen to miss on Zoom, it will definitely be posted later on Torah Anytime and Facebook and YouTube, wherever we post things. But I hope you'll join us for that. And if you have any more questions, thoughts, issues on this, feel free to text me, email me, WhatsApp me, Facebook me, Instagram me, whatever me, Zoom me, and I'll be happy to give you more insight. In the meantime, I just want to thank you all for coming, and thank you all for listening.
Scott, thank you.
Have a great evening, everybody.
Good night.
No.
Right.